America's war on the Mexican cartels has reached a point no one thought possible. Forget the undercover raids and border patrol standoffs. This new phase is darker, more secretive, and far more destructive. Behind the headlines, the U.S. military is preparing to use a weapon so terrifying that even hardened cartel leaders fear it by name. It's called the vacuum bomb. Unlike anything deployed before in the cartel war, this device doesn't just destroy buildings, it swallows the air itself, creating an explosion that turns fortified drug labs and hidden tunnels into death traps. But here's the real question. What actually happens when one of these bombs hits a cartel stronghold? The answer is more brutal than you think. For years, America's fight against the cartels has looked nothing like an open war. Instead, it's been a shadow conflict. Elite U.S. units slipping across the southern border, striking quickly, and vanishing without a trace. Working alongside trusted elements of the Mexican military, these teams tracked cartel bosses, mapped drug routes, and carried out raids that almost never made headlines. Some cartel leaders simply disappeared. Others were taken out quietly, their deaths reported as accidents or local shootouts. To the public, Mexico claimed the credit. Behind the scenes, American operatives paid the price, with bounties placed on their heads and lives lost in operations that were never acknowledged. But now, the rules of this hidden war are changing. Just weeks after the new U.S. administration took power, it made a move no government had dared before, designating 8 of Mexico's most powerful cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. That single decision opened the door for the military, especially the Navy and intelligence agencies, to treat cartels not as criminals, but as enemies of the state. And with that shift came whispers of something far more aggressive than covert raids. Not long after the terrorist designation, strange reports began pouring in from cartel territory. Residents described hearing a faint buzzing overhead at night, followed by sudden fireballs ripping through warehouses, jungle compounds, and even remote mountain hideouts. The Mexican government called them accidents. Local media hinted at drone strikes, but the cartels knew better. These weren't random explosions. They were precise, coordinated hits designed to cripple labs, weapons caches, and smuggling convoys before they ever reached the border. The technology was unmistakable. Surveillance drones loitered silently above cartel strongholds, marking targets for strikes that came without warning. Entire convoys went up in flames, their cargo destroyed in seconds. Cartel lookouts swore they saw aircraft without markings, flying too fast and too high for Mexico's radar to track. The message was clear. America had moved beyond small covert raids. This was something else. An invisible war fought with tools once reserved for battlefields in the Middle East. And just when the cartels thought they'd seen the worst of it, whispers began spreading about a weapon even more terrifying than drones or missiles. A bomb so destructive, it didn't just kill, it erased everything in its blast zone. The cartels have faced machine guns, missiles, and even special forces raids, but nothing compares to the weapon now being whispered about in safe houses and jungle camps: the vacuum bomb. Officially, it's called a thermobaric device. Unofficially, it's described as hell in a can. Unlike a regular bomb, which relies on shrapnel and pressure, this monster works by sucking the oxygen out of the air. First comes a blast of fuel that spreads like an invisible mist. Then, a second ignition sets the cloud on fire, creating a shockwave so violent it crushes everything in its path. Concrete walls collapse, underground bunkers implode, and anyone caught inside doesn't stand a chance. What makes it even more terrifying is where it's used. Cartels build secret tunnels, underground labs, and bunkers to shield themselves from attacks. But in those confined spaces, the vacuum bomb becomes even deadlier, burning up every last breath of air and turning the cartel's own hideouts into death chambers. For the U.S. military, it's the perfect tool. Precise enough to wipe out a fortified lab, but devastating enough to send a chilling message. But here's the part that no one is admitting openly. Deploying a weapon like this on cartel soil could change the entire war. And not just for the cartels. If the United States ever decides to unleash the vacuum bomb against cartel targets, the blast won't just echo in Mexico. It will shake the entire world. On paper, the justification is simple. The cartels are labeled as terrorist groups, and America has the right to strike them with military force. But in reality, dropping a weapon this destructive so close to civilian towns would ignite chaos. Innocent families often live just miles from cartel compounds. One wrong strike could level homes, schools, or hospitals, fueling outrage both in Mexico and abroad. Then there's the political fallout. Mexico's leaders may quietly tolerate American drones operating in the shadows, but admitting that U.S. forces are dropping thermobaric bombs on their soil, that would shatter national pride, spark protests, and possibly fracture the fragile cooperation between the two nations. And the cartels, for all their power, thrive on perception. If they're seen as victims of an overwhelming foreign military, they could spin the narrative, rallying locals to their side in a fight that feels less like law enforcement and more like invasion. But the biggest question is this. Once a weapon like the vacuum bomb is used, where does the war stop? Because history shows that once the line is crossed, escalation becomes inevitable. The cartels are not armies, but that makes them even more dangerous. They don't follow the rules of war, and when cornered, they lash out in ways no military handbook can predict. If America dares to use something like the vacuum bomb, retaliation wouldn't come on the battlefield. It would come in the streets, at border crossings, and even deep inside U.S. cities. Cartel operatives are embedded in networks that stretch from Central America to Los Angeles, Chicago, and beyond. Hitting them with military firepower could provoke a wave of targeted assassinations, kidnappings, and terror-style attacks designed to send one chilling message. You may have the bigger weapons, but we can still reach you anywhere. Even Mexico's own government fears this. Many officials know that if cartels are pushed too far, they might unleash chaos not just against rival gangs, but against politicians, police, and civilians. Entire regions could be destabilized overnight. And the more brutal the U.S. strikes become, the more ruthless the cartel response will be. In a war without rules, escalation doesn't just create destruction, it creates unpredictability. But the most dangerous consequence of all is the one nobody's talking about. If the cartels adapt, what kind of new weapons and tactics could they unleash in return? What began as a shadow conflict at the U.S.-Mexico border has the potential to erupt far beyond those lines. If the vacuum bomb or similar weapons are deployed, America won't just be fighting cartels. It could trigger a ripple effect across the entire region. Cartels don't exist in isolation. They're tied to global networks of arms dealers, corrupt officials, and even foreign governments that quietly profit from the drug trade. If they feel threatened, those allies might step in, supplying the cartels with new weapons, advanced drones, or intelligence support. Suddenly, what started as a crackdown could look more like a proxy war. And then there's the global stage. Other nations are watching closely. If Washington openly uses thermobaric bombs on non-state actors, it sets a precedent, one that rivals like Russia or China could use to justify their own brutal campaigns. The cartels may be America's immediate enemy, but the real danger is what this war represents: a shift in how modern conflicts are fought. No declarations, no front lines, just covert strikes, devastating weapons, and enemies that blend into the population. Which raises the question, if the rules of war no longer apply, how far is America truly willing to go? The war against the cartels has always been brutal, but what's happening now feels different. It's no longer a quiet battle of raids and arrests. It's turning into something darker, a conflict fought with weapons designed for battlefields, not border towns. The vacuum bomb may be the most feared of them all, but in reality, it's only a symbol of how far this shadow war has already gone. Every strike, every escalation, pushes the U.S. and Mexico closer to a point of no return. For the cartels, survival means adapting, striking back harder, and spreading their influence deeper into communities on both sides of the border. For the U.S., the temptation is to hit harder, faster, and with more devastating force. And in between, millions of ordinary people are left living in fear, caught in a war they never chose. So the real question isn't whether America can win this fight. It's what the cost will be. Because once weapons like these are unleashed, there's no going back.